All right, welcome to the WPIAL Blitz Show. I'm Bruce. That's Ian. And we've got a special guest with us today, Ryan Cicchini, head coach of Avella area, who's off to a great start. And Ian, very high on this team this year. And, Coach, thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you on. This is probably my favorite story that I've seen so far this year around the WPIAL. Avella off to a 3-0 start. First time since 2014 that Avella's won more than 2 games in a season. And I love these stories of these programs that have been kind of down on their luck for a few years, rising up and having a lot of success. So just for those of you who might be watching that aren't as familiar with Avella as some of us are, Avella actually won the 1961 WPIAL Class B championship, which in 1973 the designations changed and it became Class A. So
my dad was actually on that team for 19.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great. Yeah. That's great. The 60s were a great decade. Avella played the championship game in 63 and 66, and then also in the Class A title game in 75 and 76. And then went through some tough times and didn't make a postseason appearance again until 2013. And then made the playoffs 3 times in 4 years, in 2013, 2014, and 2016. Had a pretty good run there in the middle of the decade. And like we mentioned, hadn't won more than 2 games in the season since 2014, but is off to an amazing 3-0 start this season, with wins over Monessen 20-7 in week 1. The 3rd time they've beat Monessen in the last 5 years. Beat Jefferson Morgan 26-8, and then last week beat the defending conference champions West Green 21-20. And one other note, Avella made some national news back in 2008, and one of the just best stories in the WPIAL, where the program, they had they're a small school to begin with, one of the smallest enrollment-wise in the WPIAL, and they had a small roster to begin with and had some injuries and some other things, and actually had some members of the band and a cheerleader come and play on the team just so they could field a team for their last couple of games of the season, which was a fantastic story. And then the program kind of rebounded from there and, like I said, made the playoffs 3 times in 4 years. So, Coach, thanks so much for coming on. This is a great honor to be able to have you. You're actually our first guest we're having on the show.
Oh, wow.
So really cool. Yeah. So can you just
scare them away, Ian?
Yeah, this is great. This is really exciting. So can you just tell our viewers a little bit about what this start means to your program and to the Avella community?
Yeah, this is a huge start. I think it gives our team confidence to start like this. Confidence we haven't had over the last few years. And really the community's really rallied around us. It's the athletic director jokes with me, it's the hardest ticket to get in town. With it being COVID and everything, it's very limited tickets, very limited people at the game. So it's people clamoring to try to get it. They've been putting all the games on YouTube, but the public and the community have been great.
Well, that's great, Coach. Now, one of the things, and we had a program. I'm a District 3 guy. I live out in Reading here. But we had an interesting a program who, kind of rose up last year. And one of the big things, with that program had to do with, like, now all of a sudden everybody wants a piece of you, okay? Everybody wants to do interviews like Ian and I. And, so tell me a little bit about the additional distractions that you've got to deal with, with all the success.
You know what? It's not as bad this time around. When we first started winning in 2013, I don't think I was ready for all that. And I don't think the team was. I think I'm better equipped to handle that this time, especially 2013. We went on the playoff run. We hadn't been to the playoffs since 1976. So that was a big story. And at least I can use my knowledge to help these kids out through this time and keep them focused and keep myself and our staff focused as well.
Go ahead, Ian.
Okay, yeah. You mentioned that you guys are really feeling the community support, and that's great. Has it, how has it been with limited fans in the stands? Have you guys had that? I went to a game in Southmoreland last year, and they had won 5 in a row. They were playing McGuffey for the lead in the conference, and they hadn't made the playoffs since 1979, and it was a hard ticket to get. And, we drove through the street in Scottsdale, and, every business had like signs in the windows of, go Scotties. Are you guys seeing similar things like that in the Avella community, that the community is really rallying around you, even though they can't really have as many fans at the games?
Right. You see a lot of ours on social media. I get a lot of text messages. If you've ever been to Avella, there's not a lot there. We don't have a lot of businesses to begin with. We're kind of a rural school in the middle of nowhere, but I definitely feel the support on social media, Facebook, Twitter, different things. But I mean, I wish people could be at the games, because, I know I get texts and, congratulations after all the games, which, and I wish all those people were there, but, they tell me they watched it on YouTube or whatever, and how great they are and how proud they are. And I know on Facebook, I had one alumni, say it was great. He lives in North Carolina now, but he gets to watch the games on YouTube. So he's loving it too. And, everybody's been real supportive.
That's great. That's really cool. I was actually in Avella a couple of weeks ago. We took our kids out to Meadowcroft Village. So, there. Yeah, it was a great field trip. Highly recommend it for anyone out there with young kids.
Very nice place. Yes.
Coach, sometimes when you talk about a school like yourself, who's out in the middle of nowhere, isn't that much more challenging because, your kids are spread out? Maybe mom and dad really and the family a little bit more taxed to, get kids to practice, to get kids to off-season workouts?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, a lot of our kids have jobs. Quite frankly, a lot of them work on farms as summer work, or are farmers and, do work at their own place. And we always laugh, and we have problems that probably other schools could never imagine. Usually for the scrimmage game in August, that coincides with the Washington County Fair. And we usually lose several kids a year that don't make the first scrimmage because they have to go show their animals that Saturday at the fair. So, it's something I don't discourage. It's their lifestyle, and hey, we just deal with it. And that's, it's part of the problems with living in Avella, but it's good problems. I mean, it's not like they're, just skipping it to do something else. It's something they're invested in. And hey, I encourage them to do that stuff.
That's great. That's excellent. It's great leadership from you to, encourage them to support, the businesses of the community too, the farming agricultural businesses out there, but still it's supporting community business.
Right. Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have a huge game this week against California, who's also unbeaten in the Tri-County South. What are you guys doing to prepare your team for the game?
Well, we just watched film today. They look pretty good. They're a well-coached team, which, I faced Ed Wood several times in the past. He coached at Best Center too, and his teams are always well prepared and well coached, and they look like they have a strong squad again this year.
Yeah.
What do you think? What do you think some of your
dudes?
Yeah. What do you think? What is the strength of your team this year, Coach?
Definitely our defense. We returned 10 of 11 starters from last year. We knew we were going to have to rely on the defense from the beginning because our offense was kind of playing catch up with a new quarterback and a new running back. So we had, to make up for that. Now we're finally, I think, starting to get rolling a little bit on the offense. We're starting to throw the ball some more. We have a little bit more confidence in our quarterback now. So, but definitely we're relying on the defense. And the defense so far has played well and where we thought they'd be.
Ian, you have a final question for Coach?
Yeah, I mean, just shout out to KJ Rush, your quarterback. He's thrown for over 400 yards and 5 touchdowns through 3 games. So, yeah, throwing the ball a little more. Seems like he's having some success. As a dual-threat quarterback, too, which is a rarity. Those kids are kind of hard to come by. So, it's great you have a weapon you can deploy like that. And we wish you the best of luck this week against California. I saw them play against West Green last year, and I know they lost some starters from that team, but they had some big dudes in the trenches. And, good luck to your defense, especially. I know California always has a good running attack, but you guys have really shown up this year. I mean, being the defending conference champs in West Green, that was a fantastic game with a great ending where your defense came with a big stop at the end.
Yeah, those are the best games to coach, and when they're real tight, that's why we, people in my profession do it. It's so fun to be in tight games like that.
Well, congratulations, Coach. Thank you so much for being, maybe this will be a trivia question that people have to ask from now on, Ian. It's like, who's the first guest on the WPIAL Blitz show? So, Coach, thank you so very much for taking some time out of your busy schedule to chat with Ian and I, and we wish you all the best the rest of the season, okay?
All right. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you very much. And then you can just go ahead and exit out then. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Coach.
Thanks, Coach.
Yep. Thank you.
All right. Take care now. Wow. Not bad there, Ian. I mean, first guess. Hey, what do you think?
Yeah, it was good. And that was I spoke last week about how, I always like to follow what are the untold stories of high school football, those programs that have had not a lot of historical success, but rise up. And even if it's just, a team that was on a long losing streak, winning one game and breaking that streak, or a team like Avella that hadn't won more than 2 games in a year since 2014, and now they're 3-0. Like those are the great stories that you like to be able to tell. And I'm really honored that we were able to have Coach Ryan on with us and, to share some stuff about his team. And I'm so glad to hear that the community is rallying around them too, because especially with COVID and everything now, getting that interaction between, the community and the program can be difficult sometimes. And it's great to hear that they're getting that support. That we talked last week about how high school football is kind of ingrained in just the culture of Western Pennsylvania and the statewide, really a lot of towns, that the football is just ingrained in the culture of the community. And without fans or with limited fans in the stands, that can be difficult to feel that support. But it's great to hear they're getting that support.
Yeah, it is. And always a good feel-good story. I think some of the stories that that you're going to talk about in this program. I mean, look, there's plenty of media coverage in the the WPIAL, and so finding these diamonds in the rough that we can bring to light that a lot of fans, especially across the state. I mean, we hope that the show is going to translate to football fans across the state that are interested to really dig deep in what's going on in the WPIAL. And so that's great. So why don't you recap a little bit about, some of your stuff from last week, some of the top games?
Sure. So we'll just start at the top and run down. In 6A, the premier game of the week was North Allegheny against Central Catholic, which a lot of people, myself included, had kind of pegged as a preview of the WPIAL championship game. And surprisingly, North Allegheny just took it to Central Catholic. I mean, they were up. The final score was 35-21, but North Allegheny was up 28-7 at the end of the third quarter. So it was not even as close as the final score made it look. North Allegheny's defense had a really incredible effort holding running back Eddie Tillman to just 17 yards on 15 carries. And Tillman ran for over 2,000 yards last season and was 6A's leading rusher and was one of the guys that I was looking at to potentially win the WPIAL rushing title this year. And so to hold him to just 17 yards was an incredible effort, especially considering they were playing without one of their best defensive players in Nate Hoke, who's a BYU commit and the son of former Steelers nose tackle Chris Hoke.
Right.
So that name may sound familiar. But yeah, he was out this week, and they just really kept Central's running game in check, and Central has never really had a great passing game. So if you can stop their run, you can kind of slow them down. And the turning point in the game was when Khalil Dinkins, who's one of the best wide receiver recruits in the state. I mean, he's got offers from Michigan State and West Virginia and some other really big name schools. He had a rushing touchdown in the third quarter, and then a few plays later had a pick six to stretch the lead from 14-7 to 28-7. And from there, it was just on cruise control for North Allegheny. So NA is really in the driver's seat for the 6A title, or 6A regular season title. It's looking like the top 4 teams are going to make the playoffs in 6A. North Allegheny with that win over Central, they've still got some other games left on the schedule because there's been some cancellations, but they're in the driver's seat right now to get that top seed in the playoffs.
Yeah, and when you talk about cancellations, talk to me a little bit about the effect of Baldwin and how that's going to like wreak havoc out there.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, Baldwin's missed their first 3 conference games in a 7-game season with 4 games left. There's not a lot of flex room left in the schedule, so the WPIAL's probably going to have to come up with some kind of formula for how they're going to treat a team that maybe plays 4 games versus a team that plays 6 games in the conference, and how they're going to handle that, and especially if every team doesn't play each other. It's going to be interesting to see what kind of formula they come up with, especially in 6A, to kind of balance that out and try and figure out who those top 4 teams are that make the playoffs. The good news is there's only one conference in 6A. There's 8 teams, but with all the cancellations that have happened so far, especially with Baldwin, who hasn't played a single conference game yet, there's going to be some mathematical calculations that are going to have to happen, and the WPIAL has not yet announced how the playoff spots are going to be figured.
That's crazy to me. How can you go into a league play and not know what the rules of postseason are? That's quite honestly, that's shocking to me. I mean, in District 3, they had the power rankings formulas all put out there. Everybody understood. We have the same situation as well, where there are conference teams that aren't going to get a chance to play one another. And some of the teams, aren't even playing any non-conference games. There's been teams that, we got decimated with cancellations last week with COVID out here in District 3. So, that power ranking, everybody's watching it, to the T there. So I can't understand how you can be in the middle of your season, and literally you're almost in the middle of your season, and not know how your playoff format's going to be determined.
Yeah, I'm actually expecting something to come out pretty soon, because the WPIAL was kind of waiting on the PIAA to decide how the state playoffs were going to function. And the PIAA actually had 2 different options that they presented too, and the one they decided on was the state championship games on Thanksgiving weekend, which means for the WPIAL, 4 playoff teams from 6A and 8 playoff teams in every other classification because of where they enter the state playoffs. So given that the WPIAL was kind of waiting on that, because if the PIA had moved that all a week earlier, that would have halved all of those numbers.
Right.
So I'm expecting something pretty soon on how they're going to calculate, just who makes the playoffs and how it all works. And all the other classifications, 2A is the easiest because there's 4 conferences. So with 8 teams making it, it's going to be the top 2 teams from each conference. So that's cut, dry, simple. All the rest of them, 5A, 4A, 3A, and 1A, have 3 conferences. So there's going to be, to get to 8 teams, that's probably going to be top 2 teams plus 2 wild cards. And how do you figure out what those wild cards are is going to involve some kind of formula. And they're probably not going to be able to use the same formula they used in the past, because the past formulas they've used have all more or less relied on the teams playing an equal number of games and then factoring in those games and Gardner points and things like that.
Yeah, that's
crazy. Maybe we should do like a whole show where I just explain how the WPIAL playoff system works, which I'm totally fine with once we figure out what it is. But they've done some complicated things in the past.
It'd be something like Bill Nye the Science Guy, figuring it out, all the formulas there or whatever like that. Another top game that you had was Peters Township over South Fayette.
Yeah. So really, Peters Township won 17-3, but shout out to South Fayette. They had a 64-game conference winning streak. The last time they lost a conference game was in week 8 of 2011 to Seton LaSalle, and they were playing in AA back then under 4 classifications. And since then, they won 8 straight conference titles, hadn't lost a game against a conference opponent. And just an incredible streak that they had. And they moved up from when the move to 4 classifications happened. They were one of the biggest AA schools, so they passed over sort of that midpoint threshold. So they got bumped up to 4A, and then this year it's a growing community, so they got moved up to 5A and lost their first conference game to Peters Township. Peters Township excellent defensive team. They beat them 17-3. Donovan McMillan, who we talked about last week from Peters Township, who's going to Florida as a safety commit. He blocked a punt, which led to Peters' first touchdown, and then returned the opening kickoff of the second half for a touchdown. And that was pretty much the game.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's one of those instances where, the best player in Peters Township history made 2 outstanding plays and won the game for Peters Township, which is just what happens. In 4A, premier matchup between Thomas Jefferson and Bell Vernon. Thomas Jefferson beat Bell Vernon in the WPIAL championship game last year, and they're in the same conference. And really, the first half was a great game. It was on PCN, so it was available statewide for everyone to see. And they were.
That's if he had cable.
If you had cable, yeah. But it was a tightly matched game, and Bell Vernon had a 21-20 lead at right around halftime, and their quarterback, Devin Whitlock, was really proving to be a tough matchup for Thomas Jefferson from both a running and throwing standpoint. But in the second half, TJ did what TJ does, and they just clamped down on defense and ran away with it and won 42-21. So that final score was flip side from the Central Catholic score. That final score looked like more of a blowout than the game actually was, because it was a tightly matched first half. I mean, they were going back and forth, and it was an excellent affair. And that's very possible that those two teams meet again in the 4A championship game or playoff somewhere down the line. That was a really, really good Bell Vernon team that actually shut out McKeesport in week 1. So that was a good matchup. And then one of the other really great stories so far this year is Plum, who hasn't made the playoffs since 2015. They beat Mars in the Greater Allegheny Conference, who they were the only 2 unbeaten teams left. So now Plum is 3-0 and alone in first place. And, they have their eyes set on potentially making the playoffs for the first time in 5 years.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's another great story. Plum moved down from 5A to 4A this year, so I think that move down has certainly helped them. But there were some other teams that also moved down from 5A to 4A, so it wasn't like they were playing all teams that were 4A teams. That conference was kind of put together between a few teams that moved down and then some other teams that were still existing in 4A.
Mm-hmm.
In 3A, the biggest games were in the Allegheny 7 conference. My alma mater, North Catholic, beat East Allegheny, who both of those teams were undefeated in conference play. And then Freeport beat Derry. Derry had kind of been one of the top challengers in the conference the last few years, but now Derry has losses to both North Catholic and Freeport. So that kind of leaves North Catholic and Freeport as the top 2 teams in that conference. They're the only 2 unbeaten teams left. So they'll play in a few weeks, and hopefully they get to play, but they're scheduled to play in a few weeks and to decide the conference title. In 2A, the best game of the night wound up being a non-conference game between Stowe Rocks and Shadyside Academy. Stowe Rocks, it was back and forth all night. Stowe Rocks got the ball back down 42-36 with like a minute 50 left in the game on their own 8-yard line and drove 92 yards in the last minute 47 to win the game 44-42 on a 2-point conversion.
Yeah,
so that
might have been the best game in the state.
Yeah,
honestly.
Yeah, that was just a thrilling game. And Stowe Rocks' coach posted the highlights of their 2-minute drive on Twitter. So I'll post it with this when I post this on our website too, that people can watch. It was just a fantastic last drive from a group of kids that actually they had to forfeit their first game of the year because they had some eligibility issues. It was not a COVID related thing. It was kind of a crazy situation where Stowe Rocks was playing Carlinton, and at like 4:00 before a 7:30 kickoff, they called Carlinton. It was like, yeah, we can't play tonight. We've had some kids that wound up being ineligible. So, but they got everyone back and looked really good. I mean, Stowe Rocks made the 1A championship game last year and lost to Clareton, and now they moved up to 2A and are looking pretty strong so far. So they're definitely a team to keep an eye on. And finally, in 1A, the biggest result that stood out to me was Shenango beating Cornell 68-14. Shenango's Reese Watkins scored 6 touchdowns. And Shenango's a team that hasn't had a lot of historical success. They just moved down from 2A to 1A, but they're a really good, well-disciplined defensive team. And Reese Watkins is maybe one of the most unheralded players in the state so far. I don't think he has really any major college offers or anything, but he's just a fantastic player to watch. He's one of those guys where I would say he is worth the price of admission to go watch, but unfortunately we don't have fans in the stands this year, or limited fans in the stands. So, but he's just a great player, and pat myself on the back a little bit. I actually picked Shenango to win that conference preseason. So it wasn't stunning to me that they won, but it's a great story that, they haven't made the playoffs in a few years, and they kind of struggled in 2A, and now they're moving down to 1A and look really, really good.
Yeah, at least, the good part about, the COVID stuff is that so many more games are available to watch online, which has been great for me.
Yes.
Keeping up with the WPIAL and keeping up with, my District 3 stuff too. But when you talked about like forfeits or whatever like that, did you see where Bishop Guilfoyle had to forfeit a game last week because of an ineligible player? Very interesting. I guess the biggest thing that came out of that was the debate over what the score should have been. I think it was originally came across as 2-0, but now it ends up being 1-0.
Yeah, usually when I see scores listed statewide, like 2-0 is kind of the typical forfeit score, which is interesting because we actually had a 2-0 game in the WPIAL a few years ago. It was a WPIAL championship game.
Yeah, right, exactly, correct.
Yeah, between Quaker Valley and Aliquippa.
Yeah,
yep.
right.
And it was highly debatable too, because the running play that the safety occurred on, the guy got stopped like right at the goal line coming out. So the call probably could have gone either way, and they wound up calling it a safety. But with his forward progress, he maybe got out. But that was a really sloppy game. It was raining, it was wet, it was muddy. The players were like,
I remember that
even
weekend.
Take a shotgun snap. It was ball was flying out everywhere. It was a sloppy game, and Quaker Valley won 2-0 and went on to win the state championship with their best team in school history. I mean, that was a great story for that Quaker Valley team. That another program that hadn't had a lot of historical success and just got one sort of, in soccer they talk about a golden generation that kind of carries a team to a World Cup or something like that. That was a golden generation of Quaker Valley students that senior class at Quaker Valley. They won the state title in football. I think they won it in soccer, and then I want to say made the state finals or semifinals in basketball too. Like, it was just a great group of athletes that went through that year. And some of the kids played on like both the soccer team that won and the football team that won, like in back-to-back weekends. So it was crazy.
Wow.
But,
That's great. Yeah. Well, what are some of your games you're looking at to highlight this upcoming? Let's just say, what are some of the games that I should be watching?
Yes.
Out here in District 3.
Yeah. So last week was probably the best slate of games we're going to have all year. So we've got big games this week, but I don't know if any of them really rise up to the level of the games we had last week. And unfortunately, the premier game probably in the state last week, Gateway against Pine Richland, didn't happen because of a late COVID positive test at Gateway. So Gateway's game this week's against Latrobe is in question as well. So we'll see where that goes. And Gateway.
What game is that's in question?
Gateway against Latrobe, I believe, this week.
And it's because Gateway hasn't been released yet?
Gateway had a positive test, so that I think they can't – but their positive test was late in the week. It was like Thursday or Friday, so they can't practice for like 10 days, I think, after that. I don't remember what all the exact regulations are.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what the rules –
It's in question.
All I know is we've seen games on Fridays. I did a game on Sunday. There was a game on Tuesday for teams, trying to get everything in. It was funny. Yeah, I mean, Pottsville, they had a game Sunday, and then they had a game the following Saturday, and that's. But it's nice the teams are working, to adjust, to allow, teams to at least get their schedules at least halfway put together,
Yeah. The Avella West Green game was a Thursday night game, and there was a Monday night game last week, actually between Kiski and Connellsville, which were two of the lowest scoring teams in the WPIAL or in 5A last year, and they played a 36-35 game. Connellsville was up like 35 to 20 something, and then Kiski stormed back to beat them, scored in the last minute and beat them 36-35. So those things that you never know, like teams that, were averaging like 12 and 16 points a game last year suddenly play a 36-35 game on a Monday night, which it's a crazy year. But I love high school football for that reason. You just never know what's going to happen. So some of the big games that are scheduled to happen this week, I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
In
because things are going to change between now and Friday. I can tell you that.
Yeah. In 6A, we've got Central Catholic against Seneca Valley, which Central's coming off that loss to North Allegheny, and Seneca's off to a 2-0 start. So that's a potentially big game for playoff positioning. And then Mount Lebanon against North Allegheny. North Alleghany's, beat Central Catholic and has the inside track. And but Mount Lebanon actually lost their first conference game to Cannon McMillan, who was the first time Cannon Mac had beat Mount Lebanon since I think 2003. Mount Lebanon blew a 17-0 fourth quarter or third quarter, a second half lead, and Cannon Mac came back and won. So Mount Lebanon's got to get some wins if they're going to potentially compete for that fourth playoff spot. So I don't know. We'll see how they play against North Allegheny, who looks like the team to beat now. In 5A, the two best matchups on the schedule are Pine Richland against Penn Hills, which is now a conference game between those two teams. Really programs that have been outstanding over the last decade plus. Penn Hills has a lot of great tradition over time. They won a bunch of titles back in the late 70s, early 80s. They won a title in the mid 90s, and they won another championship in a couple years ago. They won a state title. It was 2018. 2018, 5A title. That was the year they moved down from 6A to 5A. Two teams that were in 6A when we first moved to six classifications that are now both playing in 5A between Pine Richland and Penn Hills, and that game is probably for the conference title there. At this point in the season, they've only played one conference game, but those are the best two teams in the conference. Right. Woodland Hills against Penn Trafford. Woodland Hills didn't make the playoffs last year, which was the first time since 1995 that they had missed the playoffs, but another good, strong, historic program. And Penn Trafford's been a really, really good, strong, solid program that they've won conference titles. They've made a couple WPIAL championship games, but they've never, they haven't won a WPIAL championship, recently. So they're a good, strong program in the Big East Conference. Woodland Hills is a good, strong contender as well. Both of them are off to undefeated starts, and they've got Gateway looming on both of their schedules later in the year. So that could be a big game for playoff positioning as well. In 4A, no games specifically for the conference title or, presumably conference titles in any case, but some of the games I'm got my eye on are in the Parkway Conference because there's only 6 teams in the Parkway, and they've only played one conference game so far. So Blackhawk is playing Chartiers Valley, which Chartiers Valley is another great story. They'd lost 14 straight conference games heading into this season and moved down from 5A to 4A, and now they're off to a 3-0 start. So that's a great story down there. They're playing a Blackhawk team, which has been really solid, made the playoffs the last couple years. That's a good game to watch to kind of be a measuring stick game for those two teams, just to kind of see where they are, because Aliquippa is in that conference too. So anytime you have Aliquippa on your schedule, they've got to circle that as a big game, but it's all kind of jockeying for position until you actually get to play Aliquippa and measure up against them. In 3A, a game that actually could be for the conference title between Elizabeth Forward and South Park in the Interstate Conference. South Park runs the ball really well, and Elizabeth Forward has a great defense. So that'll be a good one to watch. Both of those teams are undefeated so far this year. And then in the Northwest 6 Conference, Avonworth, who won the 2A WPIAL title last year, moved up to 3A this year, is taking on Keystone Oaks, who has a great dual threat quarterback in Logan Shrub, who was, I think, the 12th player in WPIAL history last year to run for 1,000 yards and pass for 1,000 yards in the same regular season.
Wow.
So it's one of those weird stats that I like to track. But I always get into debates with people on Twitter because they're like, oh, this person did. It's like, well, yeah, because they racked up more yards in the playoffs. But it's like, it's that regular season that you have to measure everyone against, that, running for 1,000 and passing for 1,000 in the same regular season. And he could become the second WPIAL player ever to do it twice. The first was Sky Moore from Shadyside Academy, who's now at Western Michigan playing wide receiver. So Logan Shrub's a great player, and it's unfortunate there's only 7 games this year, but he's been off to a great start for Keystone Oaks. So that's going to be a good one to watch. In 2A, two undefeated teams from the Midwestern Conference, Beaver Falls, who's arguably the best 2A team in the WPIAL, and I don't want to say the state because Southern Columbia exists. So
Mm-hmm.
until someone beats Southern Columbia, they're the best 2A.
Or they move up.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
which probably should have happened this year.
Yeah, right. I still to this day can't figure out how with all these formulas how they couldn't have moved up, but they didn't. So
yeah, I think it has to do with the transfers, which I'm not so the state put in the formula where there's a two-part system. There's, your success factor and your number of transfers. And I think they've definitely met the success factor, but I don't think they met the transfer factor, so they weren't forced up. I like the idea of having teams move up if they have a lot of success. I'm not a fan of including the transfers in that equation. I think if it was just based on success over the last 2 seasons, that makes a lot more sense. But the state actually has to make that change. So we'll see if that ever happens. But Beaver Falls is playing a New Brighton team who's a really good team right now, off to a 3-0 start. Nyasanu Green, their running back, has been absolutely fantastic. And Beaver Falls has a running back combo of Josh Huff, who's going to Syracuse, and Shalik Livingston. Both of them ran for over 1,000 yards last season, and they're off to a really good start this year. So 2 undefeated teams, neighboring communities. So that's always, they play for a jug. So that always, brings in a rivalry factor as well, making it fun. And, those are arguably the best 2 teams in that conference. That would be a game for the conference title. And then in 1A, I talked about Shenango getting off to that hot start. But in the same conference, Ulsh, or Our Lady of the Sacred Heart, but Ulsh for short, and Rochester are also both off to 3-0 starts. And Ulsh plays Rochester this week. So that's a big matchup between undefeated teams, trying to sort out who's going to be the top team in that conference. And then in the Tri-County South, which we just had Avella's head coach on, Avella's playing California. They're both undefeated. So that's a game for the lead in the conference. But Carmichael's is also unbeaten, and they're taking on West Green, who only loss was to Avella last week, and West Green is the defending conference champion. So don't count them out against Carmichael's, even though Carmichael's looks really good so far.
Yeah.
So 2 big games in the Tri-County South, and then a Saturday game between Clairton and Bishop Canavan. Bishop Canavan's 2-1, and Clairton is Clairton, so they're undefeated. But that's another big game in the Eastern Conference for sort of working out kind of the playoff positioning and where everyone fits in. Because right now, if you're figuring 8 teams are going to make the playoffs, you got to look at probably have to finish in the top 2 to be certain you're going to get in. Third place, maybe make it, maybe not, but top 2 is probably going to make it for sure. So those games between some teams in the middle of the conference, it's going to sort out that second place, third place, fourth place kind of deal is really, really important games throughout the last 4 weeks of the season. And it's weird to say it, but we've kind of hit the midpoint of the season now, that with a 7-game schedule, this will be week 4. So that's the middle point, and hopefully we continue to have a lot of games being played. The last couple weeks, we've had a decreased number of games being canceled. I think the last 2 weeks, we've only had 1 game canceled each week. And this week, it was a very late cancel between Gateway and Pine Richland. So hopefully we're trending in the right direction as far as, schools enacting their protocols and continuing to conduct safe practices and have safe games. And things seem to be opening up with fans being able to be allowed back into stadiums, which is cool and fun. And as long as everyone, conducts safe social distancing practices, then we should be able to continue to have more games and more of a season, which, obviously it's all about the kids getting to play. Us as fans, we like to watch games, we like to see things happen, we like to follow the storylines, but at the end of the day, even schools like Avella that we talked about earlier, that in 2008, they had kids from the band and a cheerleader come out and play on their team. And actually that cheerleader, she made a tackle in the second half of a game. They were losing. It was like 40-0 or something, but she went and made a tackle. She was playing defensive back, and it was, got a standing ovation from the crowd just because they were down to 10 players in the game because they had so many injuries that game. Right. And just those kind of stories that, it's great that kids get to play games because there's life lessons that you learn that even when you're losing 40-0, there's still life lessons that you can glean from playing football and being part of a team and working together and, working on constantly improving yourself and your own approach to the game that just go well beyond playing a game too, that benefit kids for the rest of their life. So at the end of the day, we want to be able to see kids play. So hopefully everyone stays safe out there and we can see more games happen.
It's going to be interesting too. I mean, I'd like to get your thoughts on, a lot of these schools here in the area now, District 1, District 12, they're trying to, all you see out there now is that teams are trying to get some schedules put together. Here it is. It literally, we're at the beginning of October and, oh yeah, fall sports. What does that mean? How can you I don't get how they, can expect all these programs that basically have just been dormant can resurrect and have any, kind of cohesive or meaningful season after, everything that's happened so far. What are your thoughts on that?
I think just getting out there and playing is meaningful. That in some sense, it may not matter how much success they have. Obviously, we can sit here and talk about, who's going to make the state playoffs? Is Imhotep Charter going to get teams to play them? Is St. Joe's Prep going to get teams to play them? Things like that.
LaSalle College, and then you have all the teams down in, the Central League and Chessmont, and how do you resurrect that after basically being shut down for, in essence, just about the entire month of August and September?
Yeah, I think it's tough. But I think also, there were stories out there about kids from Philadelphia getting on buses and going across state lines to go work out or go practice somewhere or, go take part in a camp that was happening in Maryland or New Jersey or somewhere like that, that the kids want to play. And from, what I've seen from the coaches out there, the coaches want to coach them. The coaches say, hey, our kids are having a hard time, and, mental health is a big issue right now with COVID. And it's been, there's been a lot of stories out there about how, overdoses are up and things like that kind of have a direct correlation between, unfortunately drug use and mental health and things like that. But it's unfortunate, but the kids want to play and the coaches want to be able to coach them and kind of get them in the building and just work with them. And coaching high school and college kids isn't always about developing them into NFL athletes. It's also just about developing them into human beings and being able to teach them those life lessons. So a lot of times, it's just getting to be able to have conversations with them and talk to them. Hey, what's going on in your life? What can we do to help? And just give them that routine and that structure of what a football schedule can do. When you have practice to go to and you have a game coming up and you have this stuff, that it gives your life some rigor and a schedule to follow, rather than just kind of this randomness of being unknown. It's like, I don't know what's going to happen. It can be scary, especially for anyone. I mean, but yeah, I think it's good they're getting back out there to try and play, I think. And the one example I'll point to locally is Summit Academy, which is a school for adjudicated youth up in Butler County. And so the kids' terms at the school are usually like 12 to 18 months because it's a part of a court adjudication. So every year they have complete roster turnover. So they're impossible to predict because you never know what's going to happen with them, because they never have the same players from year to year because they're just kids that have been assigned to the school by the court system. And they've made the playoffs a few times. And those have been just fantastic stories because they're kids who, some of them never played football before in their life, but it kind of helps them get back on the right track by just getting out there and playing and working together as a team and kind of working through that schedule. And it's with them, especially with Summit Academy, it's more about the life lessons than it is about fielding a winning program. So a lot of those same ideas can translate into, some of these schools that I know the St. Joe's Preps of the world, the Imhotep Charters of the world, some of those, they have a strong tradition of winning and winning state titles and competing for state titles. But at the same time, there's a lot of other schools in
the vast majority of them are not even remotely
League.
Close to that. It's all about life lessons, not vying for championships. I would totally agree with you. And yeah, I was very interested to get your take on that because it does matter really. like you said, for the life lessons that these kids are going to learn, that basically, you never know, is probably the single biggest thing, that, just never give up, because you never know what factors are going to change to allow you to achieve some things that you wouldn't normally have the opportunity to. So
Definitely.
great.
The other noteworthy thing that came out of the PIAA's meeting last week was that they said that if teams either don't make the playoffs or get eliminated from the playoffs, they'll let them keep playing games basically up through state championship weekend. So for those District 1, District 12 schools that maybe either they throw something together, get a couple games in, throw together a tournament to get someone in the state playoffs. If someone loses, they could still go out and schedule a few more games. And some of those Philadelphia teams have a strong tradition of playing a Thanksgiving Day game too. So they may be able to keep those games intact on their schedule, and, just get a few more games even after the typical normal season would end, even though they missed the first month of the season.
Yeah, well, I saw something where there's a good possibility District 11 is just going to opt out of the PIAA tournament and just basically play a tournament amongst themselves, and that's going to be it. So that's the antithesis of, you're letting the Philadelphia in, and then you've got District 11 saying, thanks, but no thanks.
Yeah.
So I think that there is a lot yet to be decided, on a statewide basis like that. But anyway, all right, my man, my gosh, another, I can't even remember, what show is this? We had the Lost show, and
yes.
then
yeah, so
we had these here, but it's
the third
it's just
recorded, but it'll be the second one that actually goes.
Yeah, the second one we actually
broadcast.
got there. Yeah, well, it's fascinating hearing everything you had to say about the WPIAL, and I hope our fans really like it. And gosh, we're back, next Monday at, we'll be uploading the show on Monday evenings. And then hopefully we'll have a special guest that we can talk to as well. A coach, player, whoever that, Ian deems, appropriate here for the show. So thanks for tuning in. For my buddy Ian, I'm Bruce Badgley. Thanks a lot for tuning in to the WPIAL Blitz Show. So long, everybody.